mafia.
Yeah, that is exactly the text we are tackling today.
Right. And before we go any further, I want to speak directly to you, our listener, and really just establish some very strict boundaries for this deep dive.
Definitely necessary for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the source material we are examining today contains highly politically charged, controversial, and deeply conspiratorial viewpoints.
To say the least.
Right. So I need to be absolutely clear here. Neither I nor my colleague are endorsing, validating, or taking sides on any of the claims presented in this text.
No, not at all.
Our mission today is purely analytical. We are acting as impartial reporters on the ideas contained in the original source material.
Just laying it all out there.
Exactly. We are here to break down how the author constructs this intricate narrative, not to verify it as historical fact.
Right. It's an analysis of the structure of the argument.
So imagine looking at, a neighborhood pharmacy in New York, a rusted ancient Roman coin, and a modern Category 5 hurricane, and genuinely believing they are all weapons deployed by the exact same group of people.
It sounds completely disconnected.
It does. But that is the labyrinth we are walking into right now. Today's deep dive is for the listener who wants to understand the architecture of grand-scale conspiracy theories.
Yeah, the really massive ones.
We are going to unpack a text that attempts an incredibly ambitious intellectual high-wire act. It attempts to link ancient Rome, medieval banking, maritime empires, and modern public health into one unified theory of global control.
It is a lot to take in.
It really is. So to help us synthesize this very dense web of historical and modern claims, I'm joined by our resident expert. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. And, what's fascinating here is the sheer scale of the synthesis.
The scale is just massive.
It really is. The text takes these seemingly unrelated historical events, things separated by centuries, oceans, entire academic disciplines, and binds them into a single, intentional, and unbroken timeline.
Right, like none of it is an accident.
Exactly. It doesn't just ask you to look at history differently.
Yeah.
It asks you to believe that history itself is, a manufactured product.
A manufactured product?
Yeah, it's an exercise in supreme narrative engineering.
Okay, let's unpack this engineering process from the ground up, because the author begins by completely redefining a term we all think we intimately understand.
The title itself.
Right. The text is titled The Mafia. And normally, when you or I hear that word, our brains immediately go straight to Hollywood, right?
Absolutely. The Godfather, Goodfellas.
Exactly. We think of guys in tracksuits, backroom card games, in social clubs, Prohibition-era bootleggers.
The Cosa Nostra in Sicily.
Right, or the Camorra in Naples.
Mm-hmm.
It is universally understood as localized, territorial, street-level organized crime.
Yeah, the traditional understanding is exactly that. It's highly territorial, focused on localized illicit economies like racketeering, smuggling, or illegal gambling. But the text immediately dismantles that image. It claims that all branches of the traditional mafia, no matter how powerful we think they are actually just the absolute lowest rungs of a much larger global ladder.
Just the bottom tier.
Right. The narrative asserts that these regional crime syndicates are controlled at the very top by a shadowy apparatus the author calls the Italian black nobility.
The black nobility, that sounds incredibly cinematic, almost like something out of a fantasy novel.
It does have that ring to it.
How does the text actually define this group in a historical context?
Well, the author elevates this concept far above the grit of street-level crime. They place it squarely in the realm of global, centuries-old financial supremacy.
Okay, so we're talking about bankers, not gangsters.
Precisely. According to the source, the black nobility consists of the original, massively wealthy banking families and commercial houses of northern Italy.
So, which city specifically?
Specifically originating from the maritime republics of Venice, Genoa, and to some extent Florence. We are talking about the period spanning the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries. And the claim isn't just that they participated in European banking.
Right, they didn't just have a slice of the pie.
No. The text insists they completely controlled all the major banking houses throughout Western civilization during that era.
Which, if we pause and just look at actual history for a second, those Italian city-states did invent many of the foundational tools of modern finance.
Oh, absolutely. Double entry bookkeeping.
Yeah, and maritime insurance, things like that.
Yeah.
But the text, takes that historical reality and stretches it into a conscious, centuries-long conspiracy.
That's the leap it makes.
Right. The author makes a direct leap from medieval banking practices to modern globalization, claiming that these same families founded the world's very first corporations as a tool for subjugation.
Yeah, the narrative architecture really relies on the idea that these financial tools weren't just organic economic developments.
They weren't just natural progression.
Right. The text frames them as deliberate mechanisms of control. It explicitly links the foundation of these early corporations by the black nobility to the earnest beginning of globalism.
Globalism as a plot.
Exactly. It posits that the Venetian Empire, which was the supreme naval and commercial power of its time in the Mediterranean, wasn't just, trading spices and silk.
What were they doing then?
It was essentially tasked with a massive, multi-generational logistical project.
A logistical project.
Yeah, laying the groundwork and monopolizing the major sea lanes for what the author terms the future New World Order.
Oh, wow. And here is where the historical timeline gets stretched all the way back to antiquity.
It goes way back.
Because the author doesn't just start the clock in the 14th century with Venetian merchants. They claim that the Venetian Empire was actively using the, quote, fast-fading Roman Empire as its literal blueprint.
Yeah, it's a crucial architectural element of the text's argument. The author claims this push for a one-world government was originally conceived by what they call the Babylonian Brotherhood bloodlines.
The Babylonian Brotherhood.
Right. And here is the truly massive claim that anchors the first part of the source. The text states that these specific bloodlines surreptitiously controlled every single Roman emperor, going all the way back to Augustus in 27 BC.
I just want to sit with that for a second because it is a staggering historical assertion.
It covers so much ground.
It really does. The text literally says, over the past 2 millennia, all roads lead to Rome, and concludes that all business is really Rome's business, even today.
Yeah, an unbroken line.
Right. It implies an unbroken chain of custody of global power for over 2,000 years.
And to cement this idea of Rome as the ultimate unyielding authority, the text brings in the Vatican.
The Holy See.
Exactly.
Right.
It claims that the world's first corporations were all chartered in Italy by this black nobility, but critically, they were blessed by the Holy See.
So they needed that religious stamp of approval.
Right. The author uses this mechanism to argue that even massive, seemingly independent colonial entities like the British East India Company, which was founded in 1600,
And the Dutch East India Company in 1602.
exactly. The text claims those are actually completely controlled by Rome. The logic here is that the Holy See acts as the ultimate spiritual, legal, and financial validator for this global corporate expansion.
Wow, so the monarchs of England or the Netherlands were supposedly just like middle management?
Yeah, just figureheads reporting back to the real bosses in Italy.
So what does this all mean in practical terms? If I'm following the author's logic, we can apply a modern corporate business analogy here.
I think that helps clarify it, yeah.
The text is basically arguing that the street-level mafia, the guys breaking kneecaps and shaking down local businesses, is just a local retail franchise.
But the customer-facing part.
Exactly. It's the visible storefront. Meanwhile, the black nobility and Rome act as the massive, untouchable corporate parent company.
A global monopoly holding company.
Yeah, that has been continuously operating, merging, and acquiring since 27 BC.
That analogy captures the structure the text is outlining perfectly.
It's the only way to make sense of the scale.
Right. The street-level operatives handle the messy, visible enforcement to keep local populations in line, while the parent company handles the grand geopolitical strategy
The international banking.
and the corporate chartering across centuries.
But, if we follow that internal logic, it raises a massive logistical question, which, to be fair, the text itself attempts to answer.
The location problem.
Right. If this black nobility parent company was firmly rooted in northern Italy, operating out of the palaces of Venice and Genoa, how did the locus of global financial control shift to where it is today?
It's a big jump geographically.
It is, because if you look at the globe right now, Venice isn't exactly the center of modern global finance.
No, not at all.
I mean, it's beautiful, it's sinking, but it doesn't control the world economy. If this cabal is so powerful, why abandon their capital?
Well, the text addresses this shift head-on. It frames it not as a decline of power, but as a highly calculated strategic geopolitical pivot.
A pivot.
Yeah. The source argues that as the rudiments of this vast corporatocracy were being laid in the late 1200s, This Roman Catholic power structure realized that local control just wasn't enough anymore.
They needed more.
They decided they needed to control all the natural resources and wealth on Earth. And to execute a plan of that magnitude, they needed a philosophy.
An ideology.
Right, an ideology that could recruit followers and mask their true intentions.
Yeah.
So the text claims they deliberately fabricated the philosophy of globalism specifically for this purpose.
Wow, a fabricated philosophy just to recruit a managerial class of globalists.
That is the claim.
And to execute this new, expansive globalist phase, they realized the Mediterranean was just too small.
Too restrictive.
So they transferred their financial operations, their ledgers, and their economic engines entirely out of Italy and moved them to the city of London.
Specifically, London's financial district.
The famous Square Mile.
Exactly. And the author is very careful to establish the historical continuity here to ensure that the Roman connection isn't lost in the move.
Right, they can't just abandon Rome.
No, they don't just say they moved to London. They make a point to highlight that London's financial district was originally founded as Londinium by Roman legions between 47 and 50 AD.
So to extend our analogy from earlier, they didn't just move their corporate headquarters, they moved it to an ancient Roman satellite office.
They kept it in the family, so to speak.
Right, they're maintaining the Roman branding.
The text claims this overarching conspiratorial plot was hatched deep in the bowels of the Crown Temple in London.
The Crown Temple.
Yeah. By linking the Crown Temple directly back to those Roman foundations, the author creates a narrative of an unbroken chain of custody for global wealth.
An unbroken chain.
It's the author's way of saying the Roman Empire never actually fell.
It just relocated its financial nervous system when the geopolitical climate demanded it.
Exactly.
But wait, let me push back on this on behalf of the listener. Because what was the actual business case for abandoning Venice?
It does seem counterintuitive at first glance.
Right. Venice was this incredibly wealthy maritime republic. It was the gateway between Europe and the East. Why pack up a centuries-old operation and move to a rainy island in the North Atlantic?
Well, according to the text, it was a highly pragmatic business decision driven by the changing realities of global trade routes.
Oh, the trade routes.
Yeah, the opening of new maritime routes to the Americas and the East Indies via the Atlantic Ocean meant that Venice found itself geographically disadvantaged.
Because it's stuck in the Mediterranean.
Exactly. You could no longer control global commerce purely from the Mediterranean Sea. It marked the inevitable decline of Venice as a supreme maritime republic.
They could no longer serve as the primary toll booth for global wealth.
Right. They needed a better position.
So they needed a new port with access to the Atlantic, and critically, they needed a new navy to enforce their will across these new oceans.
And the military arm.
Yeah, because the text notes that the Venetian navy was steadily losing its ascendancy. So the plot involved co-opting the English navy to serve as the new muscle for the black nobility.
The English navy becomes the enforcement arm of this relocating empire.
The new hitmen, essentially.
On a global scale, yeah. Furthermore, the text outlines a massive cultural and logistical shift that had to accompany the geographical one.
What kind of shift?
To seamlessly integrate their control, the text claims that English, not Latin or Italian, was deliberately chosen to be used as the new language of commerce for this new black nobility-controlled British Empire.
So the corporate headquarters moves to London, and the English Navy becomes their new hostile takeover department.
And English becomes the corporate language.
It is the ultimate rebranding effort.
It is a total institutional migration. London is subsequently established as the new financial capital of the world.
Housing all the major exchanges.
Right, all the trading platforms. We are talking about the total centralization of stocks, bonds, currencies, and commodities.
Everything.
The text specifically lists their control over gold, silver, diamonds, and uranium.
Uranium. Wow.
The Port of London is engineered to become the largest port in the world, the beating heart of this new maritime power, completely subverting the actual British monarchy.
Oh, right. The monarchy.
Yeah, they are portrayed merely as figureheads for the Venetian nobility in this text.
So to synthesize the author's overarching thesis in this section, empires don't actually fall. They just rebrand and relocate their headquarters when the trade routes change.
That is the core assertion driving the narrative here.
That's fascinating.
The branding changes from the Roman Empire to the Venetian Republic to the British Empire.
Right.
But the underlying controlling families, this black nobility, remain exactly the same.
Pulling the strings from the shadows.
Yes. And while the headquarters, the language, and the flags may have changed, The source is remarkably clear that the brutal methods of empire expansion remained entirely consistent.
Right, and that brings up a huge point. If this black nobility relocated to London and set up a finance and trade empire that spanned the globe, how do you actually police an operation like that?
It's a massive logistical challenge.
It really is. You can't just send a few guys in tracksuits with baseball bats to India or the Americas. It requires a totally new scale of enforcement to keep populations from rebelling against this global monopoly.
Right.
The author argues that this transition wasn't just about moving ledgers and ships. It was about maintaining control through absolute, systematized brutality.
Brutality on a global scale.
Yeah. The source characterizes both the Venetian Empire and its successor, the British Empire, as being notorious for utilizing extreme violence. In fact, it refers to much of modern history as a macabre catalog of colonization, warmongering, and terrorism.
The text is basically building a comprehensive taxonomy of terrorism here.
A taxonomy of terrorism.
Yeah. It argues that these hardcore globalists are not bound by any moral framework and are willing to employ literally every form of terrorism necessary to further the globalization of the world.
Whatever it takes.
And the list of tactics provided in the source is exhaustive, highly specific, and frankly, terrifying in its scope.
Let's walk through that taxonomy, because understanding this list is crucial to understanding how the author views every major news event of the past century.
It really frames everything.
It does. The text starts with what we might consider conventional or kinetic terrorism, but scaled up to an apocalyptic level.
Right. It lists terrorism carried out via nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Then it moves into mass violence that affects everyday civilian life, like orchestrating mass shootings, mass bombings, and mass poisonings.
Just everyday horrors.
And the text attributes all of these not to lone wolves or rogue states, but directly to the black nobility's grand design.
But then the text expands the definition of terrorism far beyond physical violence. It moves heavily into economic warfare, which directly ties back to their supposed control of London and the global financial markets.
Right. The source categorizes large-scale financial manipulation as a direct form of terrorism against populations.
Financial terrorism.
Yeah. It lists the implementation of economic sanctions, deliberate corporate sabotage, currency manipulation to destroy national economies, and commodity vandalism. It even includes the intentional orchestration of supply chain disruptions and what it terms illegal taxation, overtaxation, and tax theft.
So basically, if there's a recession or inflation spikes or a local factory shuts down, the author is arguing that is an intentional act of financial terrorism by the holding company in London.
It's all deliberate.
But as if that wasn't broad enough, the author introduces a third category that I found completely shocking. They call it geoterrorism.
Geoterrorism. This is where the text extrapolates significantly into the realm of advanced and highly speculative weaponry.
Highly speculative is a polite way to say it.
It alleges that what we perceive as natural disasters are, in fact, being artificially created and weaponized against populations.
To keep them in a state of fear and dependency.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and your head is spinning from jumping between ancient Roman emperors, London bankers, and now weather control, that's exactly the architecture we need to analyze.
It's a huge leap.
It is. The author uses this immense scope to create a worldview where literally nothing is accidental. So let's look at the specific claims regarding geoterrorism because they are wild.
Very wild.
The text lists weather warfare via weaponized hurricanes and tornadoes.
Weaponized weather.
Yeah. It mentions pyroterrorism, using dew-directed energy weapons to trigger wildfires, specifically noting seasonal forest fires, brush fires, and grass fires.
Right.
How does the text even attempt to explain the mechanics behind weaponizing a hurricane or, starting a forest fire from space?
Well, the text leverages fringe interpretations of theoretical physics and advanced military research programs to build its case here.
Okay, so it takes a kernel of truth and runs with it.
Exactly. For example, with directed energy weapons, the author is taking the real-world existence of lasers and microwave technology.
Which do exist.
Right. And extrapolating that the globalists have orbital platforms capable of firing invisible beams to instantly ignite dry brush across vast swaths of land.
From orbit.
Yeah. The logic is that by orchestrating these fires, they can destroy property, displace populations, and justify sweeping new environmental regulations that further centralize their control.
It goes even further into the realm of science fiction, though, claiming the use of scalar weapons to trigger volcanoes and earthquakes.
Scalar weapons.
Yeah, it blames them for mudslides and sinkholes. It even lists subsea floor and permafrost methane explosions as intentional acts of geoterrorism.
They cover every natural disaster.
We have to stop and unpack what a scalar weapon is supposed to be in this context, because the text drops these terms as if they were just common knowledge.
Yeah, it assumes the reader is on board. In theoretical physics, a scalar quantity is simply something that has magnitude but no direction, like temperature or mass.
Right, basic physics.
However, in conspiratorial literature, scalar weapons refer to hypothetical devices that can manipulate longitudinal electromagnetic waves.
Electromagnetic waves.
Right. The text's internal logic suggests that the black nobility possesses technology that can beam these scalar waves deep into the Earth's crust.
Deep underground.
Yeah, interacting with tectonic plates to artificially induce massive earthquakes or agitate magma chambers to cause volcanic eruptions.
That is just... wow.
The author is taking highly complex speculative concepts and presenting them as standard operating procedure for this global cabal.
I mean, this is like a supervillain's ultimate playbook.
It really is.
The text is arguing that what you and I see on the evening news as a tragic natural disaster, a devastating hurricane hitting the coast, a fault line slipping, a wildfire ravaging a forest, isn't natural at all.
None of it.
It is a highly coordinated, technologically advanced, kinetic attack on the populace by this hidden elite.
That is the uncompromising argument here. The text strips away the entire concept of random natural occurrences.
Randomness just doesn't exist.
In this framework, the Earth itself is being weaponized. Everything is an intentional act of warfare designed to destabilize nations and maintain the global control matrix.
So global control matrix.
But what's crucial for the listener to understand is how the text uses this massive list. By presenting such an overwhelming arsenal from nuclear bombs to earthquake machines, the author sets the stage for a major pivot.
Right.
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture the author is drawing, they argue that out of all these terrifying world-ending options, there was one specific weapon strategically chosen for our current historical era.
Right. The text suddenly narrows its focus. It pivots from this massive sci-fi arsenal of orbital lasers and earthquake machines to focus on one specific microscopic methodology.
Bioterrorism.
Bioterrorism.
Yeah.
The author asserts that bioterrorism was the specific calculated tool selected by the black nobility to permanently shoehorn a global control matrix into place across the entire planet simultaneously.
All at once.
Yeah. The text claims that this matrix is the absolute prerequisite for the formalization of the one world government they've been plotting since the days of Augustus Caesar.
It's the final piece of the puzzle for them.
And specifically, they point to the coronavirus as a manufactured bioweapon utilized for this exact purpose.
Precisely. The text mentions the necessity of forming a global security superstate.
A superstate.
And it frames COVID-19 not as a natural spillover event, but as the deliberate catalyst or the manufactured excuse needed to inaugurate this superstate.
Right, because if you want to lock down the entire globe, restrict travel, and mandate behaviors, a localized earthquake or a financial crash isn't enough.
No, you can isolate those.
Exactly. You need a threat that crosses every border invisibly. And to maintain this newly formed global security superstate, you need a permanent infrastructure of enforcement.
You need a system in place.
This is where the text introduces what it considers to be a central modern pillar of the black nobility-controlled corporatocracy.
The worldwide drug industry.
And we aren't just talking about your neighborhood pharmacy here, though that is a massive part of their argument. The text lumps literally everything involving chemicals and the human body together into one giant drug industry.
Yeah, it's a completely totalizing view of chemical dependency and medication.
Everything is included.
The text claims this pillar includes all legitimate drugs and medicines manufactured by big pharma, vaccines, antibiotics, antidepressants, but it also explicitly includes illicit drugs, controlled substances, and recreational drugs of every sort.
So street drugs, too.
Heroin, cocaine, marijuana, the other F. The author argues that the corporatocracy controls the production and distribution of all of it, top to bottom.
The author argues that the corporatocracy controls both the legal and illegal drug trades. But why? What is the strategic benefit, according to the text's internal logic, of pushing both life-saving prescription medicines and destructive illicit narcotics simultaneously?
Well, the text argues that fueling an ever-burgeoning global drug culture serves two distinct but complementary purposes.
Okay, what are they?
First, On a purely financial level, a global society addicted to both pharmaceuticals and narcotics generates an unfathomable amount of profit,
Oh, sure.
continuously funneling wealth back to the financial centers in London and into the coffers of the black nobility.
Following the money.
But more importantly, from a sociological control perspective, the never-ending proliferation of drug use ensures a permanently sick populace.
A sick populace that is easily controlled and manipulated.
Exactly. The underlying philosophy presented is that a healthy, vibrant, independent population is inherently difficult to govern.
They have the energy to rebel.
Right. A population that is physically or psychologically dependent on chemicals, whether they need them to survive a manufactured biological illness, manage chronic pain from a toxic environment, or simply escape a grim reality through recreation, is inherently pliable.
They are reliant on the system.
The text states that this system also serves as an extraordinarily effective control mechanism during a disease outbreak, epidemic, or pandemic.
Because, as the text points out, the globalists know full well that whoever controls the life-saving medicines and the scarce remedies during a crisis ultimately controls the global population.
It's a monopolization of survival itself.
Monopolization of survival.
If you control the disease and the cure, you control the people.
Okay, let me offer an analogy here based on what the source is arguing, because it's a very specific kind of economic model.
Let's hear it.
It sounds like the globalists, as defined by this text, have created a mandatory biological subscription model for humanity.
A subscription model. That's a good way to put it.
You intentionally make the population sick, whether through acute bioterrorism like a virus or slow degradation by pushing an unhealthy drug culture, and then you have the absolute monopoly on the only available cure or treatment.
You have no choice but to opt in.
Right. You have to pay this subscription fee, whether in money or compliance, to stay alive. It turns the entire pharmaceutical industry, right down to the local pharmacies on every corner, into the ultimate decentralized centers of control.
That analogy of a mandatory biological subscription model captures the text's central thesis on the medical industry perfectly.
It's bleak.
It really reframes healthcare from a service into an extortion racket. And it's this specific focus on pharmacies, medicine, and the drug trade that the text uses to loop back to its title.
Right, the mafia.
Exactly. Introducing a crucial new concept, the white-collar mafia.
Right, the text returns to the concept of the mafia, but this time it shifts focus from Europe to a distinctly American context. It discusses the massive wave of Italian immigration to the United States during the last century.
The author notes that millions of these immigrants arriving with nothing and desperate to eke out a living in a new country tragically became captive to the big traditional mafia families upon arriving stateside.
It was a system of exploitation within their own communities.
It was. But the text claims that eventually, these freedom-seeking immigrants split into two very distinct camps as they assimilated into American culture.
The first camp is the one we know from the movies, the one we discussed at the beginning. They joined the traditional mafia clans, the street-level enforcers, the bootleggers, the hitmen that dominated the regions of Italy from which they came.
The blue-collar side of things.
Right. But the second camp, according to the source, is far more insidious and central to the grand conspiracy.
The white-collar camp.
Yeah. The text claims that a select group of immigrants and their descendants associated with an emerging white-collar mafia. And crucially, the text alleges that this white-collar network was stealthily and intentionally established in the USA by the black nobility.
Right, to serve as their hidden managerial class in America.
And who populates this white-collar mafia? They aren't carrying Tommy guns.
No, not at all.
The text explicitly lists politicians, attorneys, accountants, real estate developers, influential businessmen, and most importantly for the text's climax, doctors.
Which provides the exact theoretical framework the author needs to introduce the primary modern antagonist of the text.
The antagonist.
By establishing that the medical industry is a control matrix and that there is a white-collar mafia of Italian descent acting as agents for the black nobility, the text sets the stage perfectly for Dr. Anthony Fauci.
This is where the text gets intensely personal and wildly specific. It zooms all the way in from a 2,000-year-old macro conspiracy involving Roman emperors and global sea lanes down to a single modern public health bureaucrat.
It's a very sharp zoom.
The author uses the intricately constructed framework of the white-collar mafia and the corrupted drug industry to completely deconstruct and redefine Dr. Fauci's identity, his background, and his credentials.
They tear down everything we know about him.
The text argues that if you look closely at his personal and family history through this conspiratorial lens, it becomes self-evident that he was born and bred, groomed, and acculturated for his specific role in the pandemic.
And what role is that, according to the text? It certainly isn't a dedicated public health servant.
No, definitely not.
The text explicitly labels him one of America's premier drug dealers.
A drug deal.
Yes. The narrative strips away his standard medical credentials and his decades of public service. The text seizes on a very specific biographical detail.
Which detail?
The fact that his father was a pharmacist and his whole family ran a neighborhood pharmacy in Brooklyn.
Right.
The author uses that fact to label Fauci himself not as a respected physician or a scientist, but simply as a glorified pharmaceutical salesman, also known as a medical doctor.
It's a fascinating, if disturbing, rhetorical move. The text takes a completely mundane, almost quintessential American biographical detail. Growing up working the register and delivering prescriptions for a family-owned corner pharmacy, and weaponizes it.
Totally weaponizes it.
It frames that childhood experience not as learning the value of hard work or developing an early interest in medicine, but as the early stages of grooming by this global corporatocracy.
And by making that leap, the author achieves something really vital for a conspiracy theory.
With that,
they give a faceless, centuries-old cabal a recognizable human face.
a villain you can point to.
Exactly. In this text, Fauci isn't portrayed merely as a government doctor, making flawed, difficult, or controversial policy decisions in the chaotic fog of a novel pandemic.
He's not just a guy doing his job.
No, he is framed as a high-ranking direct operative of the black nobility. He is the point man executing the specific bioterrorism mandate required to finally lock the global security superstate into place.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the text doesn't just stop at his family's pharmacy to prove he was groomed for this sinister role.
No, it goes much further back.
The author goes after his education, completely reframing his schooling. They don't portray his academic path as rigorous intellectual achievement, but rather as intense militant ideological indoctrination.
This brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most complex and historically tangled layer of the conspiracy theory outlined in the source.
It's a big one.
The deep dive into the Jesuits.
Right. The text places enormous emphasis on Fauci's background, describing him as a good Italian-American Catholic boy growing up in New York City who was gifted with the best private education money could buy.
But the text defines that education in a very specific, sinister way.
Yeah, it calls it the most intensive Jesuit indoctrination program in the USA.
The source specifically points out his alma maters. It notes that he graduated from Regis High School in Manhattan and then the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts.
So, prestigious schools.
And both of these institutions are run by the Society of Jesus, a Catholic order of priests and brothers, commonly known as the Jesuits.
Okay.
The text claims that the Society of Jesus doesn't just run schools. It oversees a massive, globally interlocking network of high schools and universities that act as covert training grounds for the New World Order.
Wait, stop there. Let's look at the logical leap the author is making.
It's a big leap.
It is. The Jesuits are a Catholic order of ordained priests. Fauci is a physician, a married layman, and a government bureaucrat. You can't just slap a Jesuit label on a layman who happened to attend a Catholic high school 50 years ago unless you are completely redefining what it means to be part of that order.
Right. The definition has to change.
How is the author bridging that massive logical gap?
Well, the text anticipates that exact objection and addresses it directly. It explicitly states that it is of paramount importance for the reader to understand that you do not have to be an ordained Jesuit priest to be a functional Jesuit within their conspiratorial framework.
So you can be a civilian Jesuit.
Essentially, yes. The author claims there's a vast shadow network of lay people, politicians, CEOs, doctors who have been identified, mentored, and trained in these institutions.
To what end?
The text asserts that these individuals function as covert agents and deeply loyal militants for the Society of Jesus, executing their will in the secular world.
And to prove just how dangerous the text believes these lay agents are, it provides what it claims is a direct excerpt from the Jesuit extreme oath of induction.
Yeah, the text claims this specific, highly secretive oath is given only to high-ranking Jesuits upon their full initiation.
And it is a truly staggering, blood-curdling piece of text to read.
It is incredibly graphic.
The author uses this alleged oath to argue that the true depth and breadth of Jesuit behavior of the past 5 centuries is rooted in deeply violent, systemic criminality and iniquity.
I think we need to look at the specific language the text provides in this oath excerpt because it completely recontextualizes Fauci's high school education in the eyes of the author.
Let's do it.
The oath supposedly requires the inductee to promise to make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals.
Relentless war. And the language provided in the source is just exceptionally violent and uncompromising.
It really is.
It states the ultimate goal of this relentless war is to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, promising to spare neither age, sex, or condition in the pursuit of Catholic supremacy.
And it goes on to detail incredibly gruesome medieval methods of violence.
Boiling, flaying, strangling, burying alive, ripping up stomachs, crushing infants' heads against walls, all intended to annihilate forever their execrable race.
But here's a crucial turn in the oath and why the text applies it to a modern public health official.
Right.
The oath outlines what the agent must do when open physical warfare isn't possible or strategically sound.
When they have to be subtle.
Exactly. The excerpt provided in the source explicitly says, when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangulating cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet.
The poisoned cup.
Exactly. The poisoned cup. You can see how the author is brilliantly, rhetorically linking the archaic concept of the poisoned cup from this alleged 16th century historical oath directly to the earlier modern claims about bioterrorism, vaccines, and the pharmaceutical control matrix.
Oh, wow.
It seamlessly frames modern medicine when placed in the hands of a supposed Jesuit agent like Fauci, not as healthcare, but as a weapon of mass extermination disguised as a cure.
So the syringe becomes the modern poisoned cup.
Exactly.
And all of this, the text claims, is supposedly done under the direct, unquestionable direction of any agent of the Pope or the Superior General of the Society of Jesus.
That's the claim.
But incredibly, the author still isn't done. Just when you think we've reached the absolute bottom of the conspiracy, the text throws one final, massive, historically explosive curveball regarding the origins of the Jesuits themselves.
Right, going back to the founder.
They trace the Society of Jesus back to its historical founder, St. Ignatius Loyola, in the first half of the 16th century, and they completely rewrite his biography.
Yeah, the text makes a highly controversial, heavily loaded claim here. It states that Loyola, born in 1491 in Spain to wealthy parents, was actually a crypto-Jew.
A crypto-Jew?
It claims his parents were Moranos. Now, this is a term we need to contextualize carefully.
Definitely.
Historically, Moranos, or conversos, was a term used for Jews living in the Iberian Peninsula who were forced, often under threat of torture or death during the Spanish Inquisition, to convert to Christianity.
It was a horrific period.
It was. Many of these individuals courageously continued to practice Judaism in secret to preserve their faith and heritage.
So, historical reality gives us a harrowing story of religious persecution and forced conversion following the Alhambra decree in 1492.
Right.
But the text twists that reality entirely. It doesn't view crypto-Judaism as a desperate survival tactic against the Inquisition. The text claims that as a young man, Loyola was secretly a member of the Jewish Illuminati order in Spain, implying a position of immense hidden power rather than persecution.
The narrative the source constructs completely inverts the power dynamic of the Inquisition.
It really does.
It claims that after being crippled by a cannonball in battle in 1521, Loyola realized he couldn't succeed in the traditional military or political arenas.
So he pivoted.
Right. So he supposedly devised a master plan to use Roman Catholicism, the very institution, persecuting his people as a flawless cover for his crypto-Jewish Illuminati activities.
That is just a wild claim.
The text claims he went to Paris to study for the priesthood, gathered followers, and then moved to Rome in 1539 to officially found the Jesuit order.
An order which the text then immediately describes as the most vile, bloody, and persecuting order in the Roman Catholic Church.
It's a remarkable piece of narrative construction, honestly.
Why do you see that?
Because it attempts to fuse two entirely separate, often contradictory historical conspiracy tropes, anti-Catholic Jesuit plots, and anti-Semitic Illuminati plots into one unified origin story.
The staggering layering of conspiracies here is almost hard to process. If we trace the author's logic backwards, just to see the sheer scale of the architecture,
Let's retrace it.
the author is taking the most prominent public health figure in America during a modern pandemic. They are tying his childhood experience in a Brooklyn pharmacy to a global trillion-dollar corporatocracy.
Right.
They are tying his high school and college education to a secret, militant Catholic oath that mandates using the poison cup to exterminate populations.
Mhm.
And then they are tying the very roots of that Catholic order back to a covert crypto-Jewish Illuminati order founded in 16th century Spain, which in turn answers to the black nobility who trace their lineage back to the Babylonian Brotherhood controlling the Roman Caesars.
It all connects in their view.
It is a literal nesting doll of historical conspiracies, each one fitting perfectly inside the next.
And, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises an important question about how texts like this function for the reader and why they can be so compelling to a certain mindset.
Why are they so compelling?
By tying together literally every major historical power structure, Babylon, Rome, Venice, London, the Vatican, the Illuminati, the modern medical establishment, down to the neighborhood pharmacy, the author creates a completely closed-loop worldview.
A closed loop. What do you mean by that, practically speaking, for someone reading this text?
I mean that within the internal logic of this text, no event in human history is ever random.
Chaos just does not exist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A hurricane destroying a coastline isn't a complex meteorological event driven by ocean temperatures. It's a directed energy weapon attack ordered by the black nobility in London.
Right.
A global pandemic isn't a natural, unpredictable biological spillover event. It's the scheduled, meticulously planned rollout of a global security superstate.
Every tragedy has a puppet master.
Yeah. A teenager working the register at his dad's pharmacy isn't just a kid making minimum wage after school. He is a crypto-Jesuit operative being actively groomed to deliver the poison cup to the masses decades later.
It's all predetermined.
When every single data point in existence is interpreted solely as evidence of the plot becomes entirely unfalsifiable to the believer.
You can't argue against it.
No, because any evidence that contradicts the theory is simply dismissed as further deception by the globalists. It is confirmation bias on a grand, global, historical scale.
Which brings us to the fundamental tension of reading a text like this. As human beings, we are biologically hardwired to look for patterns.
It's how our ancestors survived.
Exactly. We desperately want to know why things happen, especially when bad, unpredictable things happen. We want a narrative that makes sense of the terrifying chaos of history and nature.
We want a reason.
We want someone to be in charge, even if that someone is evil, because the alternative that we are just floating on a rock in space subject to random viruses and weather is too deeply unsettling.
And this text provides the ultimate totalizing narrative for that fear.
It really does.
It offers a single, unifying explanation for absolutely everything, from medieval banking shifts in the Mediterranean to modern viral outbreaks in our cities. It replaces the anxiety of the unknown with the certainty of a villain.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder based on our journey through this source today. When a single narrative attempts to explain literally everything from ancient Roman trade routes to subsea floor methane explosions and from 16th century religious orders to modern neighborhood pharmacies, does it actually explain anything at all?
That is the real question.
Or does the human brain simply crave this level of total unifying order, even if the order it imagines is absolutely terrifying?
I think we all know the answer to that.
Thank you for listening to another session of the Gemini Notebook.art series. You can find the full archive of all my podcasts at GeminiNotebook.art.